I'm Anastasia Chatzka. I'm a fashion designer, pattern maker, and sewing educator, and I'm so happy you're here sewing along with me today. It is summer dress season. We have been sewing and designing so many dresses in the studio. And today I'm here to share with you another dress. Today we are going to do a wrap dress in the style of a halter. This dress is great for summer, super fun and flirty, and it has pockets. This is also a great pattern for beginners, so if you're new to sewing, this one is great for you. Also, you can make this dress out of so many different fabrics. You could make it out of just a plain cotton, you could do a linen, you could do a fun print. Today, we are going to be using a super fun, sparkly fabric, has a little bit of stretch, and then we're also going to be using this beautiful embroidered netting. The first thing you need to do is print out the pattern at sewinganastasia.com under patterns, and it's a digital download so you can print it out at home or send it to a printer. And even if you're not sewing along to this pattern right now, that's okay because this video is gonna have tons of tips and tricks for sewing a wrap dress. We're gonna be doing facings and edge stitches and inner facings. We're gonna put on a fancy trim on the bottom. We're gonna be sewing straps. And how do we get the wrap dress to close? Well, keep on watching and find out. Now that you have your pattern pieces all prepped, let's cut them out of fabric. Now it's time to cut it all out. And don't forget about your grain lines. So let's do it. So now we're gonna cut out the top, and you need to make sure that your top is cut out on the bias. So make sure that your pattern is turned to a 45-degree angle, or just follow that grain line through the pattern to make sure it's parallel with your selvage, and your pattern will automatically end up on the bias. These pattern pieces are for a band at the bottom of your dress. I'm going to be sewing them up out of a contrasting fabric, but you could totally make them out of the same fabric as the body of the dress as well. And remember, the center front one is cut on fold. So now we have all of our pieces cut out. We have our skirts, we have the beautiful bands for the bottom, we have the bodice, we've got our waistband, and we've got a couple ties that are gonna be for the top of the halter. Those are gonna go up here. Next, we are gonna serge all the edges, and then we'll sit down at the sewing machine and start sewing it all together. This means everything. We're gonna serge around the pockets, we're gonna serge the hem, we're gonna serge the band, the waistband, the top, the facing, the ties. We are going to serge everything. So let's head over to the serger and serge everything up. And if you don't have a serger, that's okay. You could zigzag or overcast your edges. So back from the serger, and everything is looking great, all serged up at the edge. So nothing's gonna fall apart on us while we're sewing it or wearing it. It's beautifully finished. And I also serged my straps together, so that way it's kind of like a 2-in-1, because I knew I had to sew them together at roughly 1/4 inch anyways. And then I also serged it on an angle, so that way the end of my bow tie has a little angle. You could also keep yours just rectangle as well. So basically, I serged 2 of my edges and I left one side open so that way I can turn it right side out. So now we get to start sewing it together. We get to give it life and make it into a wrap dress. This dress is going to come together really fast once we start sewing it. So let's start with that first step. The first thing we're going to do is attach the band to the bottom of the skirt pieces. And we have 3 bands for 3 skirt pieces. So you're gonna have a band that goes at the bottom of your skirt piece here. So this is one of the back pieces. So when we sew this, we are going to flip it right sides together, and then we're gonna go ahead and give it a stitch 1/2 inch right there, and then we will have our band attached to the bottom of the skirt. So I'm going to be using a straight stitch to sew on the band. So let's go ahead and sew all 3 of those bands onto the bottom of the skirts. If you're enjoying this video so far, make sure you subscribe to Sew Anastasia and hit the notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out, because I put out sewing videos every single week, 2 times a week. So much sewing content. And if you're already a follower, thank you so much for following and watching Sew Anastasia. Now let's get back to creating that wrap dress. Don't forget the back stitch at the beginning and the end, and make sure you're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance and a straight stitch. So now you should have the band sewn to the bottom of all of your skirt pieces, and they should look something like this. And now we're gonna sew together our side seams, including that side seam pocket that's there, so let's go over it. So we're gonna sew up the side seams. We're gonna sew the back panel to the front panel at the side, so right sides together. So we're gonna sew down the top, around the pocket, and then down the side seam. And then we will have one really big skirt piece for both sides of the dress. Because you're gonna do the exact same thing on the other side, and then we'll have one long piece that we get to gather up a little bit, so that way we can wrap it around ourselves. So let's go sew those side seams. So we're going to be using a straight stitch, and we have 1/2 inch seam allowances on the side seams of this dress, and don't forget to back stitch. Take out your pins before you get to them. Also, if you're using a sheer fabric, make sure that your seam allowance is face up towards the waist of the garment. When you get to your corner, make sure you leave your needle in, lift up your foot, and turn. Same thing when you get to the top of the pocket. Come over a 1/2 inch, make sure your needle's in, lift up your foot, and turn. Back stitch when you get to the end, and cut. Now we're gonna do the same thing to the other side. Don't forget to back stitch and follow your 1/2 inch seam allowance guide. So let's take a look at what we just did. So you can see we sewed both pieces together, up the bottom, around the pocket, and then up the top of the skirt. So now we have the pocket bag here sewn together, but we are not done yet. What we want to do is sew up another 4 inches, so that way we have a depth to the pocket bag. So now with the right sides together, I'm gonna sew both of them together about 4 inches up and stop. And that's so that when you have stuff in your pocket, it's not gonna fall out. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that to both pockets right now. So now you can see the line that we sewed up here, so that way our pocket, all of its contents won't fall out. Now we're gonna do a little bit of hemming. Well, maybe a lot of hemming. So let's finish up the rest of the skirt. So what we're gonna do is fold over the center back panel here about 3/4 of an inch and stitch it down. And then we're gonna go to the very bottom edge of our skirt, and then we are going to fold this up about 3/8 of an inch and stitch it down. You could also roll hem this, you could do a bigger hem, totally up to you for your dress, but I'm gonna do a single folded hem, just folding it up about 3/8 of an inch and stitching it down. So basically, you're gonna hem this entire skirt panel except the waist. So leave the waist open so that way we can sew the waist of the skirt to it. So let's go hem. Don't forget to back stitch. When you get to the end, backstitch and cut. Now that we've finished hemming our skirt, it is looking beautiful. We have that awesome sheer panel on the bottom, just adding a bit of whimsy to it. Now we're gonna gather up our skirt and sew it into our waistband. Now let's go over to the sewing machine and gather up the waist of that skirt. I'm going to be using the zigzag method. And if you need help and all the details and tips and tricks on how to use the zigzag method to gather, make sure you check out my video on it. And if you have not tried this method, I highly suggest it. It is life-changing for gathering. So let's go gather. So I'm gonna pull my bobbin thread up to the top, grab the loop, and now I'm gonna pull out a bunch of thread. I'm gonna pull out about 1.5 yards just so I have enough. Always good to have extra. And now I'm just gonna make sure it's under the foot, and now I'm going to zigzag over both threads. When you get to the end, cut, and let's gather up our fabric. Now that we have that zigzag gather put in, all we need to do is pull the fabric down the 2 threads that you have, and it's going to gather up. Now the reason I love this method is because it doesn't break. So a lot of times you're using those basting stitches, one of those basting stitches pops or breaks, and then you gotta do it all over again, and it is so annoying, right? I know you've had that happen before. So with the zigzag method, it never happens. It is so cool. So we're just gonna keep cinching it up until we have it the right length to fit into our waistband. So I like to roughly cinch it up, and then we can adjust the gathers and even them out. So I think this looks about right. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay this on the table, and now we can pin the waistband to it. Now that we have this roughly gathered up enough to fit into the waistband, we're gonna place the waistband right sides together. But at the very end, we need it to hang off 1/2 inch. So why do we need it to hang off 1/2 inch? Because later we're gonna have to sew some waist ties to the waistband. So go ahead and leave 1/2 inch hanging off, and then pin your waist of your skirt, and then pin the waist of your skirt to the waistband. So I like to get a few pins started at this end, and now I'm gonna work my way over to the other end and make sure I'm leaving 1/2 inch hanging off as well, and then put a few pins in, and then I can really even it out. Okay, so now that we have a few pins now, let's flip it around. Now we can see that we just need to even it out a little bit more. So you really want to take the time to do this because you don't want all of your gathers to end up in one spot. Or, maybe you do want all your gathers at the side seams and you want a flat front to your dress. You can definitely play with the style and where you want your gathers. But I'm choosing to create even gathers throughout my waist. Now that we have it all pinned up, we're gonna go ahead and do a 1/2 inch seam right across the waistline. So let's sew these 2 pieces together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and don't forget to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Backstitch and cut, and then we're done. Now our skirt is attached to our waistband and it is looking beautifully gathered. And you can see that our gathers look nice and even, so that's really important to make sure that your gathers are nice and even so that way it looks professionally made. And now it's time to work on the bodice of the dress. The first thing we need to do for the bodice is grab your neckties, and we are going to turn them right side out and sew them to the top of the bodice. To turn my tubes right side out, I'm going to be using a tube turner. I just love this tool, so if you don't have one, definitely grab one. It makes turning tubes so much easier. So what you're gonna do is take the blue tube and put it all the way to the bottom, and then we're gonna take the stick and we're gonna push it through the tube because it's hollow, because it's a tube. And here we go, we have our strap. We turned it right side out that fast. And then just take out the stick that's inside and you are good to go. Now what we're gonna do is iron our strap and stitch all the way around all 3 sides, giving it a nice edge stitch. Don't forget to back stitch at the beginning and just work your way all the way around the strap. When you get to the end, back stitch and cut. Our edge stitch straps are looking great. Yours should look something like this. Now we're gonna sew the straps to the bodice, so let's go over that. We're gonna place the straps at the top of the bodice here. We're just gonna sew these down at 1/4 inch, and this is going to ensure that they stay in place when we sew the facing on. You're gonna be sewing these to the right side of the bodice. So let's sew them down. For this step, you don't need to backstitch because this is just temporarily holding these straps in place so that way they don't move when we attach the facing. So just stitch over them and cut. It was that easy. Now that you have your straps sewn to the bodice, grab your facing and make sure you attach some interfacing to it. I used a fusible, but you could also use a sew-in. So now what we're gonna do is take this facing and we're gonna place it right sides together on the front of the bodice. So you wanna make sure that it's laid out on the front of the bodice just like this. And now we're gonna pin all the way around these edges here. So basically these 2 big V's here, we're gonna pin those down and then we're gonna end up sewing all the way around this facing and flipping it to the inside. Now that you have it pinned, it should look something like this. So let's head over to the sewing machine and sew down this facing, and we're going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Don't forget the back stitch at the beginning, and we're using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Make sure you take your pins out before you get to them and work your way all the way around the facing. Back stitch at the end and cut. Now that your facing is sewn on, it should look something like this. Now what we need to do is clip our corners and our points. So first I'm gonna clip my points. So we wanna clip all the way down to the points. That way our facing flips out nice. And now what we're gonna do up here at the corners is just go ahead and clip those off on an angle. It's gonna ensure that you're not gonna have any bulky corners. And then I like to just cut off some of the bulk across the top too. So I'll cut that, I'm gonna cut here and here. Okay, now that we have everything clipped, what we wanna do is take the facing and flip it the other way. So now you can see how the facing flips to the inside. So now what you want to do is give this a good press so it's nice and crisp, and then we're going to edge stitch, or you could top stitch all the way around the edge of the bodice. So now I've ironed it and it looks great. Now we're going to do a top stitch all the way around the neckline of the bodice. Looks like we ran out of bobbin thread, so we're gonna cut and wind a new bobbin. So now we're back in action, and I'm just gonna back stitch where I left off and continue. Back stitch and cut. Our bodice is looking awesome, but we need to add some shape to the bust. And since we're not a paper doll, we're gonna do this by gathering up the bottom of the triangle. So that way it just cups your bust. So what you wanna do is measure over from center front 3 inches and put a pin or mark with chalk, and then measure over 8 inches and put a pin or mark with chalk. Now what we're gonna do is do 2 rows of basting stitches in between these 2 pins here. And we're gonna do that to both bust pieces. So I'm about to create my first row of basting stitches. And there's no back stitch with basting, so make sure you are not back stitching. I know I love saying to back stitch, but right now we're not going to back stitch. Stop when you get to your second pin, lift up your foot, and pull out your project and leave a nice long thread tail. And then I want you to line up the edge of your foot with that row of stitches you just created and put another row of stitches in, no back stitching. Stop when you get to that 8-inch mark, lift up your foot, pull out your project, and there we go. Now we've got our, now grab your skirt and we are going to attach the bodice to it. So the first thing you want to do is find the center point on your front skirt panel. So I've done that and I've marked it with a pin here so I know exactly where center front is, and we know exactly where center front is on the bodice because it's the little bottom of the V here. So we know where those are going to go. And now what we're going to do is take the edge of the bodice and we're going to make sure that that is going to be pinned to where the side seams are here on the dress. So that's going to indicate how much we need to gather up this bodice. So to gather it up, we're going to pull the 2 basting threads from the top and cinch down the fabric. So we're just going to cinch it down, and it's going to create these little gathered spots here. And now that's going to fit into that spot there. And we're going to do that on both sides. So you can see how that cinches it up, and then we're going to be able to fit our bust there now. It's created some shape. So we're going to take the bodice and we're going to flip it right side of the bodice to the right side of the skirt. And then we're going to start pinning it up, making sure we're lining up the edge of the bodice with the side seam over here. I'm going to let it come over 1 inch, the very edge of the triangle here. And just make sure you're evening out your gathers so that way they're nice and spaced out and not all squished into one little spot. Then same thing for the other side over here. Okay, once you have everything pinned, we're going to go ahead with the regular stitch and just stitch down the bodice. Don't forget to back stitch, take out your pins before you get to them, and stitch all the way down the waist at the bodice. Back stitch at the end and cut. Now that we have our bodice sewn on, let's take a look at it. We're getting so close to trying this on and I can't wait. So you can see we have our bodice sewn to the waistband of our dress here. So this is the outside, and then if we flip it back, you can see how the inside looks. The next step, and one of the last steps, is sewing your waist ties up, because we have to sew them to our waistband so that way we can wrap this dress around us. To sew up our waist ties, we're going to place our fabric right sides together, and then we're going to sew up 1/4 inch down the long side, and then we're going to sew up one of the short sides on an angle. So that way the end of our little bow that we tie has a nice little angle at the end. When I'm close to the end, leave my needle in, turn my fabric, and make an angle. Back stitch at the end and cut. Now that we have our waist ties turned and pressed, it's time to sew them to the waist. So let's sew down those waist ties. So what we're gonna do is take our waist tie and line up the raw edge of the waist tie with the raw edge of the waistband, and we're gonna put it in the middle of the waistband. So make sure that you have it right in the middle, and then go ahead and put a pin there to keep it in place, because now what we're gonna do is place our waist facing on top of it. So now go ahead and take that really long rectangle that you have left and place it right on top. So you're gonna have 3 layers here. You have your waist tie in the middle, and then you have your waistband on both sides here. So go ahead and pin that. You're gonna do that to both ends as well. And now, while you're here, you are actually going to pin the entire waist. So we're gonna flip the dress over here so you can see. And we're gonna place that right side of the facing to the right side of the dress all the way down. And what this is gonna do is finish the waistline of the dress. Make sure your ties are out of the way if they don't get caught in the seam here that we're going to create. There we go. Now we have it all pinned up. Now what we're gonna do is sew up the short sides and then down the really long edge. So this is gonna finish our waistline here. And then we're gonna take this piece and flip it to the inside. So I'm gonna start coming up the short side and then turn to do the really long side. And don't forget to back stitch and remove your pins before you get to them. And our seam allowance is 1/2 inch. Once you get to the end, back stitch and cut. So let's take a look at the waistband facing that we just created. So this is the inside of the dress, and I have the waistband facing flipped down. So that way it finishes the inside and looks nice, and it finishes the top edge of the dress. But we don't want it to be flapping around. So what we need to do is sew it down. You have options for this. You could turn under the edge and hand stitch it down, which would look really nice. You could leave it flat down, especially if you have a finished edge like the serge, which I'm going to do. And then what I'm gonna do is stitch in the ditch from the right side to keep it down. So we are going to flip the dress over. And now what we're gonna do with the waistband facing face in, we are just gonna stitch in the seam that's right here at the bottom of the waistband, and that's gonna hold the facing to the inside of the dress. We're gonna do this, and then there's only one more step. We just need to add a buttonhole so that way the tie for our waist can go through it. I'm gonna put it on the left side of the dress, and I'm gonna make it about 3/4 of an inch big. So let's go finish this dress. So I've put my stitch in the ditch foot on. You don't have to use that, but you can. And that's gonna help me guide right along that seam that's there. For this technique, don't forget to back stitch or use your fixed button. And we're gonna work our way all the way down the seam. And get to the end, back stitch and cut. The waistband's on and it looks great. Now we're going to add our buttonhole about 1 inch over from the bodice, just right in the waist. I'm gonna make it about 3/4 of an inch long. This is gonna be for our waist ties to wrap around our waist. If you don't know how to create a buttonhole, no worries, just make sure you check out my video for that. There should be a card up here and a link below down in the description. And we're done. Our buttonhole is looking excellent. Look how beautiful it is, and I love it in the contrasting pink thread. We did it, we finished it. So exciting. So now let's take a look at it on the dress form and go over the details, and then I'll try it on and see how it looks. Check it out, it is so beautiful. I love these contrasting fabrics. I love that this fabric has some glitter to it. I love the deep plunging V, so cute, but a little sexy. I love the little gathers under the bust. I love the little bow at the side. And I think it's really fun that the bottom has this sheer panel at the bottom. But again, you could make this dress in any fabric combination you can imagine that fits your style. And let's take a look at the back. So we have an open back, great for summer. We have the halter tie at the neck with a little bow, and we have that overlap, which is the wrap dress. So this dress is always going to fit you great because you wrap it to put it on. So I'm gonna try it on and we'll check it out. Here it is, all finished. I love it. It's super comfy to wear because you just wrap it and tie it right on. And don't forget, it also has invisible side seam pockets. So you can keep all your little goodies in there and you don't have to carry a purse. I just love the fabrics that this is made out of. Wrap dresses are great because they fit everyone. You just wrap it and it tailors to your body perfectly. Who doesn't love a great fitting dress? I know I do. This is such a great dress for summer because it's so flowy and it breathes well and it has an open back. You can go right from the beach to dinner. How awesome is that? And don't forget, you can download this pattern at Anastasia under digital downloads because I designed the pattern. And now you can have a great fitting halter wrap dress too. Thanks so much for watching Anastasia today. I hope you had fun making a halter wrap dress with me. If you have any questions about it, leave it down below in the comments and I will get back with you as soon as possible. As always, make sure you subscribe to Anastasia and hit that notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching and following along. If you enjoyed this video today, make sure you give it a thumbs up, give it some applause, and let me know what kind of fabric you're going to make this dress out of. And don't forget to follow me on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and TikTok, and all those other social media websites so that way we can stay connected and creative together. Speaking of that, I would love to see your projects, so make sure you tag me at Anastasia so that way I can share them with everyone else. And if you didn't know, I now teach sewing classes in my design studio in Chicago, Illinois. So make sure you check those out at sewinganastasia.com under sewing classes. Thanks so much for watching. Bye!